In the spring of 1504, a sealed document arrived at the Joseon royal palace. No one knows exactly who sent it or how it reached the king's hands. Some say it was a letter written in blood. Some say it was a court testimony that had been hidden for decades. What is certain is this: when King Yeonsangun read what was inside, something in him broke permanently. He had been king for 10 years. He had already executed scholars, purged enemies, and ruled with a hand that grew tighter every year. But the man who walked out of his chamber after reading that document was a different man entirely. Within weeks, he would begin one of the most violent episodes in 500 years of Joseon history. He would dig up the bodies of dead men to punish them. He would kill women who had served his family for decades. He would silence anyone who had ever known the truth. This is the story of Yeonsangun, a king who was not born a monster. He was made into one. To understand what Yeonsangun became, you have to go back to 1479. That year, the 9th king of Joseon, King Seongjong, made a decision that would haunt the dynasty for the next century. He deposed his queen. Her name was Queen Yun. She was young, beautiful, and deeply unpopular with the women who held real power at court. In particular, Queen Dowager Insu, the king's own mother, a formidable woman who believed a queen's role was to be silent, obedient, and politically invisible. Queen Yun was none of those things. The official record says she was reckless, jealous, and violent, that she had scratched the king's face during an argument. An unforgivable act of defiance in a Confucian court, that she had attempted to harm a royal concubine. The court moved swiftly. She was stripped of her title and removed from the palace. 3 years later, in 1482, King Seongjong sent her a final message. Not a letter. A poison cup. This was Sado, death by royal command. A condemned person was given poison to drink. It was considered a mercy in the logic of the court. It was done in private. It left no mark, no visible wound. Queen Yun drank the poison and died. She was 29 years old. Her son was 6. The boy did not know. That was the plan, the deliberate, carefully maintained lie that the entire court agreed to keep. King Seongjong's advisors were clear. The crown prince must never learn how his mother died. He must never learn she had been executed. He must be told only that she had passed away, that her death was natural, and that she was not a subject fit for remembrance. She was officially erased. For the next 12 years, the boy who would become Yeonsangun grew up in a palace where his mother did not exist. He knew he had been born of a queen. He knew that queen was gone. Beyond that, he was told nothing. He was, by most accounts, a difficult prince, smart but volatile, intensely emotional in ways that troubled his tutors. He pushed against the rigid Confucian discipline the court demanded, the expectation that a crown prince should be composed, scholarly, obedient. He was none of those things naturally, but he was not a monster, not yet. In 1494, his father, King Seongjong, died. Yeonsangun was 18 years old. He became the 10th king of Joseon. He had no idea what the palace had taken from him. The first years of Yeonsangun's reign were not, by themselves, alarming. He was an active king. He hunted. He held elaborate banquets. He was more interested in pleasure and the arts than in the dry, bureaucratic machinery of Confucian governance. This irritated the scholar officials who expected a king to spend his days reading classical texts and consulting ministers. Yeonsangun found those men tedious, and he did not hide it. There were early signs of cruelty. Incidents where punishments seemed disproportionate, where his temper turned a minor offense into a serious one. But kings in Joseon history were not gentle. This was not unprecedented. Then, in 1498, something happened. A historian named Kim Il-sun had, years earlier, included a passage in the official court annals, a passage praising the scholars who had opposed Sejo's seizure of the throne 4 decades prior. In the closed world of Joseon politics, this was explosive. Sejo, the usurper from episode 2 of this series, was Yeonsangun's great-uncle. Criticizing Sejo's coup was, by extension, an attack on the legitimacy of the entire ruling line. Yeonsangun moved. Kim Il-sun was arrested, tortured, and executed. Several other scholars were killed alongside him. More were exiled, stripped of their positions, or punished posthumously. Men already dead, desecrated in their graves to satisfy the judgment of a living king. This was the literati purge of 1498, the Muosahwa. Korea's scholarly class looked at what had happened and felt something new, fear. But this was only the beginning. No one agrees on exactly how Yeonsangun learned the truth. Some accounts say a court lady, bitter from years of silence, finally told him. Some say a document was smuggled from the archives. Some say his own biological grandmother, the woman who had pushed hardest for his mother's execution, let something slip during an argument. What the records agree on, in 1504, in the 10th year of his reign, King Yeonsangun discovered that his mother had not simply died. She had been executed by poison, on his father's order, at the urging of court ladies and ministers who found her inconvenient. She had been given a cup she did not want to drink in a palace she had once ruled as queen, surrounded by people who had decided she needed to disappear. And she had taken a piece of cloth. Before she died, she had pressed it against her lips until it was stained with her blood, and she had left it as evidence. Evidence that her death was wrong. Evidence addressed to the son who would someday need to know. That cloth, 22 years later, reached him. There is a moment in every story where a person makes a choice. Yeonsangun chose rage. What followed was not madness, exactly. It was something more deliberate. Yeonsangun moved through the court with the systematic precision of a man who had been planning this for years, even though he hadn't. He had a list of names. Everyone who had signed the order deposing his mother. Everyone who had been present at her execution. Everyone who had enforced the silence that kept him ignorant for 2 decades. Many of them were already dead. That did not save them. He ordered the exhumation of the corpse of Han Myong-ho, one of the most powerful officials in Joseon history, the man who had helped orchestrate his mother's downfall. Han Myong-ho had died peacefully years before, honored and celebrated. Yeonsangun had his grave opened, his coffin unsealed, and the remains subjected to posthumous decapitation. The head was displayed publicly. This was not law, exactly. Joseon had a concept of posthumous punishment, the idea that a criminal's guilt followed them beyond death. But it had rarely been applied at this scale, to this many people, with this level of personal fury. He had the ladies-in-waiting, who had given his mother the poison cup, rounded up and executed. Aged women, some of them, who had spent decades in the palace, and perhaps believed that their service to the crown had buried their role in that 1482 death. Yeonsangun did not let them keep that burial. He had scholars who had supported the queen's deposition killed. He stripped titles and positions posthumously from men who had served his grandfather. He reached backward through time and punished everyone his research could find. This was the literati purge of 1504, the Gapsawa. It was larger than the 1498 purge, more brutal, more personal. Korea had seen kings kill officials. Korea had not seen a king kill officials for something their predecessors had done to his mother 22 years before his reign. After the purges, something shifted in Yeonsangun's relationship with power. He had always preferred pleasure over governance. Now, with the scholar class shattered and afraid, with the court emptied of anyone willing to push back, he indulged himself without restraint. He expelled Buddhist monks from their temples inside the capital and converted the grounds into personal pleasure parks. He commanded that women, from kiseng entertainers to daughters of noble families, be brought to the palace for his banquets. He created 2 new categories, the Hungchong, who served as performers, and the Unhang, who were essentially personal property of the court. The number of women registered into these categories eventually numbered in the thousands. He banned certain words in the palace. Anyone caught discussing his mother's death, his purges, or his conduct could be executed. He silenced the censorate, the government department whose function was literally to criticize the king, by having its members beaten or removed. The palace was no longer a center of government. It was a sealed world where Yeonsangun's word was the only law, and the only safe response to that word was total agreement. Outside the palace, the country watched and waited. It could not wait forever. By 1506, the surviving nobles had reached the end of their patience. A group of officials led by Park Won-jong began quietly meeting, carefully, in private, in whispers, the way conspiracies have always started in palaces where the walls have ears. Their plan was straightforward: depose the king, replace him with his younger half-brother, Prince Joseon. On September 2nd, 1506, they moved. The coup was remarkably clean. The palace guards, many of them resentful, underpaid, or quietly sympathetic, offered little resistance. Yeonsangun was in his chambers when the sound of armed men reached him. He did not fight. Perhaps he understood immediately what was happening, or perhaps he was simply too stunned to act. He was stripped of his title, taken from the palace, and sent into exile on Ganghwa Island, a cold, desolate island off the western coast of the peninsula. His half-brother became King Yongjong. The new court wasted no time declaring Yeonsangun a non-king. They revoked his royal title retroactively. In official records, he would not be given a temple name. The posthumous honor given to every legitimate king of Joseon. He would be remembered only as Yeonsangun, the Prince of Yeonsan, a demotion designed to erase him the way his mother had once been erased. He was 30 years old. He would be dead within 2 months. Yeonsangun died in exile in November 1506, 2 months after his deposition. The official record says illness. It does not specify what illness. It does not say who attended him, what treatment was given, or how long he suffered. Modern historians note that a deposed king, who could theoretically reclaim power or serve as a rallying point for a loyalist uprising, was an uncomfortable thing for a new government to leave alive. The 2-month timeline, combined with the vagueness of the cause, has led many to conclude that Yeonsangun was quietly allowed to die, or not allowed to recover. The records, of course, were kept by the people who had overthrown him. He was buried on Ganghwa Island, without a royal tomb, without ceremony, without the elaborate rituals that marked the deaths of Joseon's legitimate kings. But here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated. In the centuries since his death, Korean historians have been rethinking who Yeonsangun actually was. The historical records we have of his reign were compiled and edited by his enemies. The very officials who had organized his overthrow, and who had every reason to make him appear as monstrous as possible. They had power over what was written, what was kept, and what was destroyed. Was he the depraved tyrant the records describe? Almost certainly. He was cruel, and his purges killed people who did not deserve to die. That part is not easily disputed. But was he also, in some sense, a son who had been lied to his entire life about something fundamental? The death of his own mother. And who, when he finally learned the truth, responded with a rage that his position made uniquely devastating. Was the silence that protected the court from accountability for 22 years not itself a kind of cruelty? These are questions Korean history has been wrestling with for centuries. They don't have clean answers. Yeonsangun left behind a word. The Korean expression hongchongmangchong, used today to describe reckless, wasteful extravagance, derives from the names he gave his 2 categories of palace entertainers, the hungchong and the unhang. When people use this phrase in Korea today, most do not know they are speaking the name of a dead king's private court. He also left behind a precedent. After Yeonsangun, the Joseon court never fully trusted a king again. The scholar official class had seen what happened when a monarch removed all checks on his own power. And they spent the next century quietly, systematically rebuilding those checks. The censorate returned. The institutional constraints on royal power grew stronger precisely because Yeonsangun had shown what happened when they disappeared. In that sense, the most effective argument for institutional restraint on power in Joseon history was not a document or a debate. It was a 10-year demonstration by one very angry, very damaged, very powerful man. His mother, Queen Yun, was eventually posthumously restored to her royal status, centuries after her death. Her tomb was given the honors appropriate to a queen consort. The court that had erased her finally acknowledged her. Yeonsangun himself has never been rehabilitated. He remains, in official Korean history, a deposed prince, not a king. But the question his story leaves open is one that every generation has to answer for itself. What do you do when the institution that is supposed to deliver justice is the same institution that committed the injustice? What does a person become when they have the power to ask that question, and the power to answer it with violence?